the energy in the room shifted. Immediately, I just remember floating above my body and watching from above. And I watched as my heart stopped on the operating table from an allergic reaction to the anesthesia. And immediately, I was shuttled into this life review. It was almost as if I was like engrossed by this 360-degree panoramic movie screen where I got to see my life flash before my eyes from start to finish. So from the time I was born to the time that I was now dying, it wasn't that I just watched my life flash before my eyes. I had this ability to embody the characters of the movie. I got to see this specific moment where my grandpa was sharing these war stories with me. And I was on my phone and I just wasn't present with him and I wasn't listening to him. And it was the last time that I ever got to share with my grandpa. Those memories flashed before my eyes. I died full of this regret because I had never forgiven my father during my life for these beatings. And I got to do so from his perspective as well. And at the end of my life review, all I wanted was this second chance. But I found myself calling out for this God. So eventually I just completely surrendered. I was shuttled into this place that I just can't describe. It's the most beautiful place I've ever experienced in my life. And then this strange figure appears.
My guest today is Bubba Herrick, who had a near-death experience, and he was shown in his near-death experience the father's path and why he suffered abuse at his hands. This is such a powerful story, and you might recognize Bubba because he has been on the show before, but last time there was a hurricane. So this time we have an excellent connection, and I'm really excited for him to share his story with everybody again. So Bubba, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And what an introduction. Oh my goodness.
Well, I'm excited. I'm going to say to you what we talked about off camera before we started this interview. And I have interviewed hundreds of people now who have had near-death experiences, and I've watched, read, and listened to thousands of them. And when we were getting ready to talk today, I didn't have to go look up your NDE because I remembered it perfectly because it left an impression on me. And I think the biggest message for me in this NDE for you from that you had is that you have the ability to release people who are watching from victimhood mentality, that something happened to them and they hold on to it and carry it forward because you were given this massive gift of, of a viewpoint that you never would have had without this experience. So I'm really excited that you're back again to talk about this. And I'm excited that you have a book that is also very unique too. And we'll talk about that later. But why don't you go ahead and share your NDE in any way that makes sense for you to share it?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start from the beginning. Some context is important for my NDE. So I was 19 years old at the time. And I was a baseball player in college. My whole life was centered around baseball, baseball, baseball. And my whole dream as a kid was, I'm going to go and play in the major leagues. That's what I'm going to do. So I was on track for that goal. I played a Division I baseball program, which is the highest level of amateur baseball that there is, right a step under the professional leagues. It's called Jacksonville University in Florida. And I suffered an elbow injury my freshman year of college. The elbow injury, the surgery that it required was called Tommy John surgery, which for those who are not really familiar with sports, Tommy John surgery is one of the most popular surgeries in all of sports, named after the first pitcher who ever had the surgery, Tommy John. Basically what happens is the surgeon goes in, replaces your ulnar collateral ligament, which is right here in your elbow. It's usually said to have a 12 to 16 month return. And then most people who have the surgery end up coming back better than they were before getting injured. So I was devastated that I would have to sit out a year for this surgery. But at the time, my expectation was, okay, I'll just come back throwing harder and being better. So the day before my surgery comes, and I have this pre-operation meeting with the nurse, and she's asking me all these questions to make sure that I'm able to be operated on. I'm 19 at the time, so I'm just kind of yesing her along. I'm just like, all right, lady, let's get this over with. And she gets to the last question of her sheet, which is something along the lines of, are you allergic to anything that might complicate the surgery? And I was yesing her along. When she asked me that question, it kind of stopped me in my tracks. And I felt this, I don't know, this intuitive feeling in my solar plexus. Like, I don't know, that question was off. Something about this is off. And for whatever reason, I told her that I'm not allergic because I'd never been under anesthesia before. But I left that pre-operation meeting and I was like, this surgery is going to change my life. I just don't know how. So the next day comes and I'm in my pre-operation room now. I'm hooked up to all the machines and I'm in my hospital gown and I have my mom to my left. And the surgeon comes in and he says, Bubba, here's how this is going to work. He says, we're going to put anesthesia through your IV. By the time we dismiss your mom and that we put the anesthesia in your IV, we're going to wheel you to the operating room. Now, the operating room was on the same floor, so it wasn't a very far trek. He said, by the time we get to the operating room, you're going to be unconscious and under the anesthesia. He says, the surgery is going to last 1 hour. You won't feel a thing. We'll send you back on your way. And then in 1 year, we'll get you back onto the field. So he seemed to be very confident. He seemed to be very excited. His energy was up. It was very early in the morning, so my energy was down. I didn't want to get cut into at 5:30 in the morning, but that's what was happening. So he dismisses my mom. He administers the anesthesia through my IV and dismisses my mom. And before he does so, before my mom leaves, rather, any mom watching this, I'm sure yourself included, Laurie, probably very nervous before their son or daughter is going under the knife. So my mom was very, very nervous before the surgery. So I looked to her and I assured her, I said, Mom, I love you. Like, we're fine. I'll see you in an hour, right? He just said it'll last an hour. I won't feel a thing. I'll see you in an hour. She says, I love you, baby. I'll see you soon. So he puts the anesthesia in my IV, like he said, and wheels me to the operating room. But when we got to the operating room, I wasn't unconscious. I was still conscious. I was like kind of half in, half out of consciousness, and it didn't feel like I could open my eyes or say something that I was still awake. It just felt like all this was kind of unfolding exactly how it was supposed to. And a couple minutes passed by, and the surgeon is getting ready to cut into me and operate on me, and I'm still awake. So I'm bracing myself for impact at this point. And all of a sudden, the energy in the room shifted. The once excited doctor, his energy completely shifted from let's operate on this kid to, oh, like something's wrong here, like something's not right. And immediately I just remember floating above my body and watching from above. It felt like there was like a thick glass panel from where I was watching above and where I was on the operating table. It was almost as if I was like on the second story of a house, looking down at the first story, and the floor was glass. And I remember watching my body turn like this bruise-like purple, and then this like kind of lifeless blue, and then like I don't know, like a mixture of like this dull white, gray, and brown, like the color of a corpse. And I watched as my heart stopped on the operating table from an allergic reaction to the anesthesia. And immediately I was shuttled into this life review where I'm sure many people watching know what the life review is, but it was as almost as if I was like engrossed by this 360-degree panoramic movie screen where I got to see my life flash before my eyes from start to finish. So from the time I was born to the time that I was now dying. And what was unique about the life review that you alluded to earlier, Laurie, is it wasn't that I just watched my life flash before my eyes. I was in the movie, and I wasn't just in the movie. I had this ability to embody the characters of the movie. So everybody involved in my life review, myself included, I could experience these things from their perspective. And there was so many memories, obviously, that flashed before my eyes in my life review, and I won't be able to get to all of them, but there were a couple that stood out that I think are worth sharing. Um, I'll get to that in a second, I guess. But the theme of my life review was not exactly positive. And the reason for that was because I got to see all the moments of my life that, I mean, my grandpa, for example, was a Vietnam veteran, and he and I would share a lot of time together in my teen years on these reclining chairs in my living room. And in my life review, I got to see this specific moment where my grandpa, who was very sick and very ill, was sharing these war stories with me. And in my life review, I got to see this specific memory where he would share this story with me, and I was on my phone and I just wasn't present with him and I wasn't listening to him. And it was the last time that I ever got to share with my grandpa. And in my life review, I got to see this. And there were other moments of my life that I got to see. Obviously, you alluded to the beatings I received from my father. Those memories flashed before my eyes in my life review. And, I died full of this regret, if you will, because I had never forgiven my father during my life for these beatings. I mean, I held this deep, deep, deep resentment because I never understood where my dad was coming from. And he never explained why he was beating my brother and I with the belt, or he never explained to us that he was trying to teach us. And my whole life, like I said, I just hated him for it. But in my life review, I got to see it and experience it all over again. And I got to do so from his perspective as well. And, my whole life, I thought that he was doing so out of this like ill intent. And he was just like expressing hatred to my brother and I. But what he was actually trying to do was teach us what he believed discipline to be. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that later on. But so, anyways, the theme of my life review, it just wasn't positive. And at the end of my life review, um, like I said, I died full of this regret. And for whatever reason, all I wanted was this second chance. I had never believed in God. I had never really had like a spiritual religious belief in my life. But at the end of my life review, I've found that I had so much anger towards myself for dying full of this regret. And I found myself calling out for this God. I was like, God, I know what I need to do now. Like, please just give me this second chance. And I didn't hear any response or anything like that. So eventually I just completely surrendered. And I said, God, I don't know if you're real. I hope you are. My life is over. I understand that. And whatever's next, I just surrendered to it. And as soon as I did that, as soon as I surrendered to it at the end of my life review, I was shuttled into this place that it chokes me up just thinking about it. It's this place that I just can't describe. It's the most beautiful place I've ever experienced in my life. It was as if I was looking at the outside world from the perspective of the inside of the purest diamond in the universe. There were these refracted combinations of light that just seemed to be bouncing off one another, forming this one universal color. And I didn't have senses in this place. I didn't have a body in this place. There was no time in this place. There was no time in this place, but it felt like I was time, which I guess is hard to conceptualize. And it just felt like my home. It just felt like I was home. I didn't have a body. I didn't have a brain. I didn't need to know things though. I just knew everything in this place. And it felt like I was in this place for forever. And then this strange figure appears. And immediately without transition, this figure passes me a basketball. And in my life review, I had just experienced this same exact moment, a beautiful, beautiful basketball game that actually it was a real moment that happened on Earth when I was 12 years old, and it happened with my stepfather. So my father was, like you said, abusive and not great to my brother and I. But when I was 11, Mike, my stepfather, came into our lives, and he really kind of took over this fatherly role and saved my life, honestly. He had passed away when I was 18, so about a year before my near-death experience. So I got to experience this basketball game with Mike. He was a sports guy like I was. And in my near-death experience, we got to play this basketball game again. And the game it was just full of loving competition and almost as if to say, welcome home, you know? And the game felt like it lasted forever. It was so much fun, so beautiful. And at the end of the game, Mike's tone shifts a little bit. So it went from, loving competition to almost more fatherly and stern. And basically, if there were words, there were no words, but if there were, he would have said, all right, let's cut the crap. Like, why are we here right now? And he said to me, he said, Bubba, I know how badly you wanted that second chance after your life review. Like, I know that you died full of this regret and this resentment and all of these unhealed wounds and all of these things that you wish you could go back to fix. And then he says to me, I'm here to offer you that second chance on behalf of a higher power. But if I give you this second chance, you have a responsibility to serve your great purpose. And you need to make sure that the next time you die, you're ready for it. And even though he gave me a choice, Laurie, it didn't exactly feel like I had much of a choice. If it were up to me, I probably would have elected to stay in this place because it did feel like such a home, but it was a bit of a paradox because I did have so much unfinished business. I did die full of this regret and I knew what I had to do. And Mike didn't tell me what the great purpose was. He said that the next time I died, I had to be ready for it. So reluctantly, I accepted his offer and I said, I love you. And he said, I love you and I'll see you soon. And then the next thing I remember was I was back in that proverbial second floor of that house watching below me as the doctor shot me with the shot that saved my life. And I woke up on the operating table and I was punching doctors. I was throwing punches at the doctors because I was so disoriented. And and then I woke up and life has never been the same.
Wow. Bubba. Wow. I'm really blown away by your story in multiple ways. And I was brought to tears when it makes me want to cry again. Um, the visual of you sitting there with your grandpa. I have a similar visual sitting with my great grandpa in chairs in a living room. I didn't have a phone back then and I wasn't, I was always engaged in the conversation, but even you just saying it brought me back to my own memory of my grandpa. And I know how special grandparents can be in our lives. And to have seen that from that perspective, which I'm sure you probably never even thought of, how did that moment make your life after you came back different?
Oh my God. Yeah. It changed everything. It changed so much. And I think the most simple way to answer that question is I don't I used to not believe like the whole thing about, oh, this could be the last time you spend with somebody. I used to never believe that before my experience. And I think that specific memory taught me that, as well as my own near-death experience, obviously how fleeting and fragile life is. So I guess practically speaking, when I'm with people now, I make sure no matter who they are or in under what circumstances or context I meet them in, I'm with them fully. I'm not on my phone. Because it genuinely could be the last time I get to experience them or they get to experience me, and I just want to make sure it's as full of love and presence as it could be.
Wow. I'm making a short out of that. That's so good. That has the ability to impact a lot of people. I know we don't always think that way. I want to go back to the life review.
Yeah,
And specifically, I want to go back to your dad because when we were together last time, you
yeah,
shared with me that you not only saw the perspective of he was trying to help you, not hurt you the way that you had perceived, but you had a peek into the backstory of his life also. And I'd
right.
love for you to share a little bit more of that detail of what you saw of his life.
Yeah. Well, my dad was raised in a very, very tough time. He was raised in a blue collar family. He was raised very violently. He was medicated very, very, very young. He was bullied. He was made fun of. He was treated the same way that he treated me. And that's kind of what I saw. I got to experience in my life review. Something else I think that's worth mentioning is that he was very unsure of himself. I thought my whole life that he was super confident and believed fully in what he was doing and how he was disciplining us. But that wasn't the case. In my life review, I also got to see that he didn't have conviction in his actions, and there was
How
a
did
part
how
of
did
him.
you see that? How did explain how you understood that?
I think less than seeing it, it was more of a feeling. Like I got to feel what he felt rather than see. I mean, I did get to see what he saw, but I got to feel what he felt. And I think more than what I saw, that feeling is what really, really, really changed me after my near death experience.
Okay, this is so big right here. I know that Bubba is sharing his story, but this is for you or for somebody who you know who is suffering from a memory from their childhood that they cannot get over. And
Yeah.
every time Bubba tells this story, it makes me feel like we set things up, we pick our parents. And I know when I first
Mm.
started talking about this like 5 years ago on YouTube, I had backlash from it. People were like, I did not pick my parents. But could you also see from the life review the benefit of having that experience at your father's hand that you thought was terrible and bad?
That's a great question. I think more so after my near death experience, I was able to really, really spend a lot of time with that. I don't remember or I can't really recall very well during my life review that I learned those lessons initially, like right away. I will say by the end of my life review, I did have compassion for my dad, and I just wanted to give him a big hug because I finally understood that his intentions were pure. I mean, I would say that's probably fair to say for most people's parents. I'm not a parent, so I don't know how hard it is, but I can only imagine how difficult it is. Um, he just made these mistakes with pure intention, and I think that's probably something a lot of us could relate to. But it didn't. I didn't really learn that until after my near-death experience, when I've gotten a little bit further away from it, and I can kind of look at it objectively.
Did you ever have a conversation with him and tell him what you experienced?
Yes, I did. I did. I don't think it went exactly how I would have wanted it to go, but yes, I did nonetheless.
Do you think he believed you that you had had this experience?
No, no. And it's funny you bring that up. I think it's funny to mention. It's always an interesting little side story. When I woke up on the operating table, I recalled the whole story, exactly how it had happened, how I just shared it with you. And I was sedated, obviously, because I had just been revived and I was supposed to be under anesthesia, but I wasn't. So I was kind of like out of it. And I shared the story with my mom. And initially, my mom, I shared the whole thing, and she was like, "Yeah, whatever. You're just on these drugs." And then a nurse actually overheard what I shared with my mom, and she said, "Ma'am, your son's not making this up. Those are called near-death experiences. You should look into them." And I had always kept that in the back of my mind. But I bring that up because no, my dad, he didn't believe me at first. My mom didn't either. I mean, if I would have shared my own story with myself before I had a near-death experience, I probably wouldn't have believed it either.
Okay, so there are things though that give people confirmations, evidential information,
Hmm.
evidential confirmations that this really happened. And you
Yeah.
had that because you were privy to what was going on in the operating room when you were supposed to be unconscious and you didn't, and you left your body and you saw what you saw. Did you
Mm.
ever have a conversation with any of your doctors or anybody who was in that operating room about what you witnessed from above your body?
No, I have not, but not by my choice because I've reached out on several occasions, but I've gotten no response. But I've really, really tried to hash all this stuff out with them, but no, I haven't, unfortunately, because I would love the opportunity to speak with them.
You know what's interesting about that? I had a pharma background, and one of the things I do understand is how things work with malpractice insurance because my doctors that I would visit would talk about that a lot. I would bet you money it has more to do with a fear of you're going to tell me something that I did potentially that was wrong that is going to open me up for a lawsuit, less than I'm
Sure.
curious and I want to hear what he has to say.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, but yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, so let's go back into this life review.
Hmm.
I know from talking to lots of people, because the life review, for those of you who haven't heard me say this before, the whole reason I started doing these NDE interviews is because of my obsession with the life review, because I saw the changes that people came out of these experiences and made in their lives after they got a peek behind the curtain to see how things worked.
Hmm.
And one of the most unusual aspects of a life review isn't just that the life flashes before you, but it was, as you described, that you had the ability to change your perspective and to become any person inside that life review. Now, you'd only lived to be 19, but
Hmm.
you got to see your whole life from birth to death. Can you share what was maybe the biggest surprise in rewatching that life review that you were like, I had no idea?
That is a tough question. I don't know if I could share the biggest one because they're also like everything that I saw and experienced was so impactful. I would share that I a large part I had no idea what trauma was before my NDE. I had no idea what healing was. If you would have talked to me about that stuff before my near-death experience, I would have been like, "What? You're just weak, you know?" Like I was that guy. I was that athlete, you know, the ego-driven guy. So I would just kind of like, "No way. That doesn't exist." But in my life review, I really got to see how my unhealed trauma, if you will, for lack of a better term, affected the way that I lived my life and how it affected my relationships and how it affected my decisions. I mean, I developed an addiction, a very pervasive addiction that I got to realize was driven by all of my unhealed trauma. And all of that was discovered in my life review. And obviously, on the other side of my near death experience, I've overcome all those things. But I never would have acknowledged it. I never would have even thought that that was really driving a lot of my decisions. And it led to me eventually dying full of regret, you know, never addressing these things.
Wow. I'm trying to let that sink in because that's really big what you just discovered. Did you have, I know people sometimes focus on some of the negative things,
Hmm.
but I remember hearing a story. This isn't somebody I've interviewed, but it's a life review that touched me, and I'll just share it really quick, and maybe you can think of one from yours that had this similar effect. It was a young kid who had a near death experience and a life review, and he saw him, or he wasn't a kid, but he saw himself as a child. And his family had stopped at a rest area and they had to go and get water. So this was many years ago. And they went to this little river, and he and his sister each had a bucket of water. And it was just a far enough walk. And he was like 8 years old. It was too heavy. And he knew he was going to have to dump some water out. But instead of just dumping it out, he looked around and he saw a young sapling and decided that that sapling should be given the water. And so he walked out of his way, gave it to that little tree, and then walked on. And in his life review, he saw that that was one of the most important acts that he had performed in his life,
Wow.
which says a lot for how the other side reveres things that are done with intention and love.
Right.
Did you see some of those things that you could share with us?
I did. I absolutely did. And I got to see for sure how my actions rippled outwards. Um,
Ooh, let's talk about that a little bit too.
right. I can't recall a specific memory that stands out more than what I've shared, though. I think the main theme of my life review, as unexciting and, you know, not very eventful as it is, it was not exactly that positive. I think the second half of my near death experience was more of the love and embrace and that kind of energy rather than the teaching energy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the ripple effect because I've talked about this a lot on this podcast, a ton, and in the videos that I've done. So not only are you experiencing yourself, but you're experiencing these other people. So what did you learn about the ripple effect that you didn't know before your near-death experience?
Well, oh my gosh, that's a tough question too. I would say how I was treated by my folks or my parents or other people, I would then share that and treat other people with that. And in my life review, I guess that kind of stood out a little bit was I never realized how much, again, going back to those unhealed traumas, I never realized how much of that would ripple outward if I had never addressed it before, or how much I would project that onto other people and how much I would allow that to bleed into my relationships. After my near-death experience, I've obviously learned so much about that stuff, but that stood out to me for sure in as it pertains to that ripple effect.
So if that had that big of an impact,
Hmm.
you probably came back and changed a couple of things.
Right.
Did you go back to some of the people that you saw and actually talk to them and address what you saw in your
Absolutely.
experience?
Every single person, even down to
Every
like,
single person.
yeah, even down to people that I might have, I don't know, like when I was in elementary school or middle school or high school and I did something that was just a silly prank or something, I would even call those people and say, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize, I don't know if it affected them or not, but I just had that on my conscience and I wanted to rid myself of that.
Did anybody share with you that it had affected them?
No, no, but they did thank me. They did thank me, which I guess maybe alludes to the fact that it did affect them. I don't remember.
Well, you know what I love about that too? You gave people something different to think about. And when you shared that with them, just like right now, how you're sharing this story with thousands of people, it will make people who have not had a life experience or a life review and near death experience stop and think about maybe how this might affect somebody else.
Right.
Did you have a sense of connection differently than you did before your NDE because of this, of how we're connected to other people?
On the other side of my NDE, you're saying?
Yeah,
Or
however that would manifest for you. Like, did you understand? Like, people come back from an NDE and they'll talk about oneness, like we're all one, we're all
oh
connected.
yes,
And
yes.
did that seeing what you saw have an effect on how you thought about the connection between people like that was different before you had the NDE?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I that second half of my NDE when I was in that space of unconditional love, that is all that I felt was oneness. I felt no separateness whatsoever. It felt like I just was. Yeah, I was everything. Everything was in me. I needed nothing other than what I had and what I was, rather, because I didn't have anything, if that kind of makes sense. It's hard to conceptualize. But now on the other side of my near death experience, I do my best to keep that at the front of my mind that we are all one, and you are me, and I am you, and
Yes.
I really do my best to keep that at the front of my mind because it's so important, I think. So important to just for peace of mind, really.
I also want to talk about that room that you went into because you used a description that I love that I haven't heard anybody use before. And I know that these experiences are beyond words because having been on the other side, it almost seems ridiculous to try and tell people this because you don't have anything even close to what you would like to say about it. But you said that this was like the most brilliant diamond shining. So, in whatever ridiculousness, lack of words we have here, can you explain a little bit more about the feeling and what that place made
Mm,
you think differently about your life after you came back? Because you said you didn't necessarily believe that there was a God, and I feel like that place was God.
right. Yeah, absolutely. I strongly feel that. Um, I'll do my best to describe that feeling. I mean, it's pure euphoria, just pure awareness. Heaven is a term that I've heard a lot. Um, as far as like how it might have looked, similar to maybe looking through a kaleidoscope, if you've ever looked through a kaleidoscope or something like that. It's just so much refraction of light that is just bouncing off of each other, and you can't make out anything. Like there's nothing to look at in terms of physical objects, but it's very abstract. Like you said, it's so hard to talk about what it might look like, but it
Can you
just
talk about the
felt,
energy of it?
yeah, I can try.
I know, I know, I know, I know.
It felt like my spirit was full. My spirit, my heart was full. I was the universe. The universe was me. The energy was love. I mean, pure unconditional love. And I'd like to emphasize the unconditional part because I wasn't judged for dying full of regret, and I wasn't judged for the mistakes that I had made during my life. I was judged by myself. I wasn't judged by anything greater than myself. Um, and if I was to be judged by something greater than myself, it would have judged me unconditionally and loved me. That's what the energy was like.
So before you had your NDE, you weren't even sure what happened or that anything happened or that there was anything.
Right.
And then Mike used the word that indicated that there was something and you had already felt and experienced it. So when you came back, how did that change you? Because that probably had a pretty big effect on you as well.
The experience with Mike or the
Both, however you
oh,
want to, yeah, however you want, because they're really kind of tied together.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'll say this. After my near-death experience, initially, like I said, my mom, she kind of shut down the whole thing. So I shut down the whole thing. I was like, well, okay, that happened. That was obviously very, very crazy, but I don't really feel ready to accept that and embrace that because if I were to accept and embrace that, I would have to change who I was. And I was not ready to do that because it wasn't like I just had to change a little bit about myself. I mean, this is worldview changing, life changing. This is one of those experiences and how powerful it was. So I shut down my experience for 3 or 4 years. I didn't even admit to myself that it was real until eventually I couldn't ignore it anymore because it was changing me from the inside out. So it took me about 3 to 4 years um, to to open my mind up to the fact that God was real and that God is in me and that I am everything and everything is me. And yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but it took me a long time to even acknowledge those things, let alone surrender myself and have the faith and trust in this higher power.
Now let's talk a little bit about Mike.
Yeah, he had passed away when I was 18, so about a year before my near-death experience. The basketball game that we shared was a real memory that happened on Earth, but yeah, he passed away when I was 18.
Okay, which makes that so much more profound. Would you, in your Bubba life experience before that happened, have ever expected him to be somebody who would come through if you went to the other side?
No, I wouldn't have believed that.
So I know that people describe the other side as being more real than
hmm
here and more vivid. Can you describe that part of that basketball game in your encounter with Mike?
Yeah, it felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced, and to this day, anything I've ever experienced. It was more real. I shouldn't even say it felt. It was. It absolutely was. Yeah, the basketball game, we didn't. Neither of us. It's so hard to explain, but neither of us had bodies. We weren't. Which obviously on Earth, it's like, how do you play basketball without a body? Yeah, it's hard to explain. But there weren't words either. But we were communicating. But it was almost as if the communication was telepathic in a sense. We didn't have to exchange words. We just knew what the other was kind of saying. And it was just beautiful. It was so beautiful playing basketball with him. So beautiful.
Okay. I don't know if I can get this out of you because again, the word limitation.
It's so hard. Yeah, I'm
But
really trying.
the part of this that feels more real than this,
Hmm.
can you speak to that and why that feels more real, seems more real than any other experience you've had on earth? What about it heightens it in a way that makes it feel different than an earth experience?
I think it is what we are right here. There was no ego, there wasn't like this egoic voice in my head that tied myself to all of these labels and identities that I hold here on earth. Like it wasn't Bubba the author or Bubba the speaker or Bubba the coach. It really wasn't even Bubba. It was it was just my who I truly am at the core of my being, the eternal being that I am. It was that. And I wasn't separate from that. It was all encompassing. And I think that is what made it more real than here, was because Bubba is going to live and die here. But what lives inside of Bubba is who I truly am. And that is what I was expressing in this place. And that's what I felt in this place. So I felt
So
I felt alive without an ego.
so you had this experience.
Hmm.
What are we? What is everybody watching this? Because everybody wants to know, like, okay, this is great. He had this experience, but how does
Sure.
this apply to me? Who are all of the other souls watching this really from the other side perspective?
Just that, just souls. I think that, obviously you're Laurie and I'm Bubba, and the folks watching this are who they are on Earth and in our day-to-day lives. But that's gonna stay here, and we won't move on as Laurie and Bubba. We'll move on as consciousness, pure awareness, a soul or spirit, however you want to kind of use whatever term you might want to use. So I would say from the other side perspective, that is what we are, is an eternal being that is made up of pure consciousness, pure present awareness, rather than a brain or a heart or a body or a job or a career. I don't know, yeah,
Exactly. So in your NDE, you have this feeling of, oh, wow, I didn't realize this perspective. I have to go back.
yeah,
I have to go back and be able to change this. But you're not going back. They didn't say, okay, we're going to send you back. They instead send you into the love oneness experience. Then they send you into the basketball game. Can you describe the regret part of that feeling that you weren't going to get to have a chance to go back and change it, and how
yeah,
that affected you after you came back?
yeah. That I could talk about that for a long time because that was so impactful. Like seeing everything that I wish I could do again, but not getting to do it. I sometimes use the analogy. It's kind of a vulgar analogy, but it's how it truly felt. Like it's almost like you have your hands tied behind your back and someone is punching you in the face, but you can't retaliate or you can't do anything about it. You just have to take the punches, if you will. And I don't mean to like share that in a violent manner because it wasn't a violent feeling. I should be very clear about that. It wasn't like a violent feeling, but I felt powerless in the sense that there was nothing I could do about it. And as far as the regret goes, I was just very upset with myself because I knew I could do better. And when I say do better, it's not that I needed to quote do more or be more. I knew that there were times in my life when my intention wasn't pure, and that was part of the reason that I died full of regret, especially when it came to that event with my grandpa or some of the decisions that I had made, some of the things that I never apologized to people. And I knew I should have apologized to people. And I never said I love you to people. And I knew I should have said I love you. So those things that were completely within my control that I didn't act upon in the right way, those were really what led to me dying full of regret. Now, on the other side of my near-death experience, I think the biggest takeaway for me from dying full of that regret is I do those things now, even if I'm upset or angry or sad or however my emotional state is. If I have an opportunity to apologize when I'm wrong, I have to make sure to shed my ego and do so, because I know if I know what happens if I don't, or maybe it doesn't happen again, I guess, but I don't really know that. But I just want to make sure I do the right way, and I leave this world better than, I did the first time. So on the other side of this, yeah, that's what I would say is I just make sure to shed my ego as much as I can.
So I want to clarify something about
Hmm.
the end about it when you were told that you were going to get to go back, but the message was you better live it differently so that you don't come back that same way. Was there any feeling that you would not get to go back to the place that you experienced if you came back to Earth?
No, no.
I
I
love that you're sharing that, because I think that there are some religious conceptions that make people feel that it is their deeds and what they do that causes them to have an experience in heaven or somewhere else.
mm,
And I don't believe in that personally. I know everybody goes from my personal experiences on the other side, but I'd like for you to speak to that a little bit, because you were given a challenge to
right.
utilize your time and come back differently.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Or a good, yeah, I've never thought about that. I don't think it's the deeds that we do in terms of, for me, for a long time after my near-death experience, Mike said, you have a great purpose that you need to serve. The next time you die, you need to be ready for it. After my near-death experience, for the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I thought that it was a career. Uh, for example, I thought it was a career that was my purpose, and I thought I
The
had to be.
baseball, right?
Well, at first it was baseball, and then after I got done playing baseball, I was like, oh, I need to be a New York Times best-selling author, or I need to be a TEDx speaker, or like, this big thing. And if I'm not this big thing, then I am a failure, and I haven't completed my great purpose. And now I would say I don't think it has anything to do with those things as in terms of achievement. I really don't. I think it's more about, are we acting out of love or not? Now I don't believe that. I believe all of us are forgiven in some sense. I do believe there are consequences for our, actions and decisions. But I do believe that all of us eventually return to unconditional love.
What do you think the consequences are? I'm curious.
I think it depends on the person. I mean, for me, I think my consequence for the first time around when I died was dying full of regret. I think that experiencing that feeling was the consequence for my decisions. I think it's a life on the life seems to be a game of inputs and outputs. If you push a button, something's going to come out on the other side, and you have control over what button you push, but I don't think you really have much control over what happens on the other side. So my advice to myself now is push the button with really, really good intentions and do the right thing. And whatever comes out on the other side, at least you did the right thing.
There it is. There's a perfect gold nugget for everybody who's watching. Push the button with the intention, not knowing what the outcome is, but the intention. I really do believe that intention counts more than anything else. Because I think
Yeah,
there are a lot of things that we do, like in your life review, you experience all kinds of things that you did that you really weren't aware of. You didn't do those with intention. But I would
absolutely.
imagine the ones that you saw, like where you were like, I'm not going to say I'm sorry, hit you differently than when
Yeah,
you just did something to somebody and you didn't say sorry just because you didn't really know.
right. Yeah, we make mistakes. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And I make a lot of
Well,
mistakes
I
to this.
don't, but just kidding.
We all make mistakes except Laurie. Laurie does not make mistakes.
I
Um,
mean, plenty every day.
Yeah, no, I think mistakes are a part of this thing. But like you said, I think a mistake, there's a difference between a mistake and a wrongdoing. And it's like you said, it comes down to an intention. If I make a mistake, but I have a good intention, it was just an accident. If I if I make a decision with ill intent, that is a wrongdoing. That's not just, you know. I think I don't know, that's kind of how I look at it now.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm really curious. So you have this massive experience, you bury it for 3 or 4 years. Who was the first person that you told it to that actually believed you and you went, I know this really happened to me?
Yeah, the first person I ever told was my best friend from 9 years old. His name is Dylan. We were playing baseball in college
You
together.
go, Dylan. I'm so proud of you.
He's actually upstairs. We live together. I have to tell him you said
Awesome.
that. We were in college and we were playing baseball, and we were sitting on the front porch of my mom's house, and it's in rural Florida, so it's like just a deeper conversation environment. And we're on these rocking chairs, and we're talking about deep things, and he asked the question. He's like, "What do you think happens when we die?" And I was like, "All right, this is this is my chance to share this." So I shared it with him, and I shared it with him knowing how sensitive I was to, like, I didn't want him to sit there and tell me this isn't real. I just needed that support, and he gave me that. And without that, I definitely wouldn't have written a book about it or shared stuff on podcasts like this. So that was just monumental for me.
What was his reaction?
He was very, very, very surprised, and he had never heard anything like it, like myself, before my experience. But he was very adamant because I got to the point in the story where I told I told him that Mike said the next time you die, you need to be ready for it. And I didn't really think much of that when I had thought about my near death experience before telling Dylan. And I told Dylan, and that night, our ritual for context, after we would rock in the chairs, we'd go inside and we would eat, frozen pizzas and ice cream and just be like irresponsible young adults. I told him the next time we die or I die, I have to be ready for it, is what Mike told me. So we went inside after I shared all this with him, and his reaction was I preheated the oven to throw the pizza in. He took the pizza and threw it in the garbage. And he said, the next time you die, you need to be ready for it. You need to act that way. And that was kind of the standard that he set for me moving forward.
That actually makes me want to cry, and I don't even know why it's eliciting that response in me. But like, I know you guys are young when you're having this conversation. What a wise thing for
Yeah.
somebody at that age to do, and what a valiant act of
Mm.
support for your best friend. Like, that really touches me that he reacted that way
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah. Me too. Even
It's
just
like
talking
he's,
about
you won't know
it.
this reference, or maybe you will, but he's like the Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that changed my life. That was a very pivotal moment in my integration process.
Wow. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about integration process, because I know that there are statistics about this. And I think at one point in time, and this is probably not true anymore, but I would say up until 2015 to 2020, the statistic was that it took on average somebody who had a near death experience 20 years to be able to
Oh,
really talk about it. Integration,
wow.
20 years, because it's
Huh.
not widely accepted. It's not part of the mainstream. It's fringe. I've had people on my show who describe things like this and got locked into psychiatric wards
Oh
because
my
they were
gosh.
looked at as crazy. So you're lucky in the
Yeah.
sense that there were stories out there, there were books out there, there were videos out there where you could connect to others who had these experiences, which I think make them more real. The more we hear somebody else's experience, the more it confirms our own, right? And signs and
Right.
synchronicities and NDEs and all kinds of things. So this integration process still took you a while. So will you speak to that a little bit so people know, like, it's so brave for you to come here and talk about this because these are intimate experiences that you have that are part of you. And, people luckily on my show are super kind in the comments about these things, but every once in a while I get people who are judgmental and say things, and it just makes me mad because it takes so much for somebody to put themselves out there to even share these. So I'd love for you to speak to that.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have the courage if people like yourself weren't doing what you're doing. So thank you before I get
Oh,
into that. Yeah, thank you so much. Because that's actually what prompted me to share more about my experience was I came across an interview. It wasn't in the near-death experience space per se. It was a comedian, but he was interviewing Dr. Jeffrey Long. And that was my first ever exposure to near-death experiences. And I wish I could meet him and just say thank you because that really changed my life as well. But
well,
as
for those who
far
don't know who Dr. Jeffrey Long is, do you want to explain?
I don't know a whole lot about him. I really only watched that one interview. I know that I believe he founded the Near Death Research Foundation or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. And he wrote a
Yeah.
book called The Evidence of the Afterlife. He's a physician, I
Yeah.
believe. Okay.
Yeah. So he
Yeah.
studied NDEs, and you knew more about him than I did.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm still very new to all this, but yeah. So as far as integration goes, like you said, it's super, super challenging. And I think for me, having this experience at 19 years old, I already had no idea who I was. Like I really had no idea what life was about. In some ways, I still don't. But it was almost as if I was like a double identity crisis at the same time, and it was very, very difficult because I found it to be very lonely. Like it's very hard to relate with the English language as I'm sitting here trying to explain my near-death experience to folks because you really can't, like you said, you can't limit it to you can't say, oh, it feels this way or it looks this way. So I found it to be very, very lonely. Number one. Number two, I found it to be super, super confusing because you're in this place that feels more real than anything you've ever experienced in your life. And then you come back here and it's like or I'm speaking for myself. I know that this place that I was in is more real than where I am now. And that for me specifically, can't speak for other experiencers, but that caused a lot of anger, a lot of resentment towards God for a long time because I was like, okay, why would you bring me back to this place when that's my home? So integration is very, very difficult. And sometimes it still is. It's a process for sure.
That's not uncommon at all. I've talked to a lot of people who have come back and actually gone into a depression because
Yeah.
they have to be in that separation again, which is what we
Yeah.
signed up for. So, okay, I'd love to hear your perspective on some of the things that you've integrated that you're like, I know this for sure now. This is 100% my truth and I know this to be true.
Mm, that is a good question. I know to be true that death is not scary. I know that to be true. I think before my experience, if you would have told me that, or if I would have heard that, I would have been like, "Oh my gosh, no way, you're insane." But now, I know that to be true. I know God or the universe or source or whatever, verbiage you want to use, not only loves us unconditionally, but is pursuing us as hard as we are pursuing him, her, it, whatever you want to call it. I think it's a team effort. I think we're co-creators of our own reality. I know that to be true. Um, I also know that I I'm not limited to this existence. I don't die. I last forever. The real me does. Bubba does not.
I would like you to elaborate just a little bit on the co-creation. You touched on something that I went, wait a minute. Can you explain where you've understood that you weren't doing something by yourself and that you were co-creating?
Well, writing my book, I would say
Yeah, let's talk about your book. Let's talk about it.
I didn't write it, like I didn't do that all by myself. I couldn't have. I'm not smart enough to do that. I'm not wise enough to do that. I'm not. humble enough to do that. But I would sit down to write, and it was almost as if something higher, smarter, wiser than myself was working through me. So the book has my name on it, but it should actually say written by God, because I could not have created that without something greater than myself. So as far as like how does co-creation work, I wish I could explain it. I think it requires us to get out of our own way to make space for something greater than us to work through us and use us almost as a vessel of sorts.
Mhm. Wow. That is absolutely beautiful. Bubba, this has been such an amazing conversation.
Yeah,
I'm so grateful that I get to do this, but your book just came out. I want to talk about this the book thing. I
yeah,
sometimes see this in the comments and it makes me upset every time I see it. And people are like, oh, they're just selling a book. The
yeah.
reason people write a book is because why? Tell me why.
Well, I don't know why anybody else would write a book, but for me specifically, I wrote this book because integration was so hard for me. I had no way to deal with it. I couldn't, I tried therapy one time, and I sat down to talk to a therapist, and it just he couldn't relate to what I was trying to express. So I left. That didn't work. I couldn't talk to any of my peers about it, my family about it. The only place I could ever express myself was in my journal. And that's why I wrote this book. I wrote it for no other reason than to heal and to process this whole experience and what followed, not just the near death experience itself, but the fracture it had to my relationships with my folks and all of that. The loss of baseball, the loss of identity, homelessness. I mean, I was homeless writing this book. I wrote most of it while living in my car, actually. I wrote this book for no other reason than to process emotions, deep emotions.
I don't ever do this on my show, but I want everybody listening who has the ability and has the means to get Bubba's book because I feel very motherly towards you.
Oh,
You're
thank
my
you.
kid's age, and I just feel like I want to protect you. I
Thank
feel
you.
so proud of you. Like I
Thank
met
you.
you and talked to you before you did this book, and I actually wasn't expecting that answer. A lot of times when people write a book, it's because the details are so great that they can never express it in a sitting in an interview, and there's just so much more to it. But you wrote your book from such a different place. And I just feel the need to support you in what you're
Thank you.
doing because I feel like your book and how you have described your near death experience is such a healing journey. And I just think it has the ability to help so many people to let go. I want to ask you this
Thank
question.
you.
This is something that I've talked about quite a lot on my show, and I really, really believe this, and I emulate and live this in my life. But do you think things happen to you or for you?
For you. Oh my goodness. For you. I think while I was in all of this stuff, I thought it was happening to me. But now that I'm on the other side of all of this stuff, oh my gosh, it's happened for me.
Why?
Like I said earlier, I think God pursues us and wants us just as bad as we want him or her or it. I really believe that. And I think it takes a lot of faith to believe and surrender to that idea that everything's happening for us. But I just think that's what God wants for us. Wants us to be our best, wants us to love, wants us to live, wants us to be full of joy and love and peace.
I think this mindset of recognizing that everything's happening for you changes you in how you react. I'm still human. I still get mad. I still get mad, but one of the things that I've struggled with my whole adult life is I am like this super achiever and I have a
Mhm.
list of things that I want to do. And if something happens to stop that progress, I get upset. So I'll give you an example of something that happened this week. I had an appointment that I had to go to. I had a call for work and I'm trying to juggle all of it. So I stay on the call too long. And by the time I look at the traffic, it's 5 minutes longer than it was before when I looked at the traffic. And now I'm going to be 5 minutes late to it was an eye doctor appointment. Okay. And I don't like to be late at all because I just, especially for something like that, when it's a scheduled thing, I don't want to mess up anybody else's schedule. But I got in the car and I was talking to my sister, and I live in a different house than I've lived in for the last 10 years. And so you are in a different place, and it takes you in different traffic patterns to get places than you did before. And I'm on
Mhm.
autopilot talking to my sister, and I get on the ramp on the wrong highway going the wrong direction,
Oh
and I
no.
start yelling in the car. She thinks I'm getting pulled over by a cop because of my reaction, which was utterly ridiculous. But I'm already 5 minutes late, and now I'm going to be 10 minutes late. And I'm just really, and I'm not mad. I'm mad at myself for being
Right.
in this situation. And she is like, it's all happening for you. And you don't want to hear that when
No.
it's in the moment of that. But I knew it to be true. And on the way, I saw a sign that kind of connected to a deal I'm working on that I wouldn't have seen if I hadn't have been in that place to see this truck with a logo at the exact time. And then everything, of course, worked out perfectly in the doctor's office. I still had to wait for him to come in. He wasn't waiting in the office for me. So I knew that it all unfolded perfectly. And I think that that's like a great example of everything is always happening for you, and you'll get confirmations if you stop and slow down. But the bigger thing is to integrate it so that next time when that happens, my reaction isn't to yell and get upset. It's to take a breath and go, I don't know why this just happened and I was on autopilot and drove the wrong way, but there must be something else that's at play here that I don't understand. And when you
Right.
do that, I think you become happier overall. And so I'd love for you to speak to that if you have anything you want to add.
Oh my gosh, that is a great story. That is a great story.
So
Oh,
human,
so
doggone me.
human. Oh my gosh, so human, so relatable too. Um, I could speak on that for a long time. Everything, I don't know. I think that, like you're saying, if peace is what we're after, it's always attainable. It just depends on how we choose to look at the situation. And it is a choice. It is absolutely a choice. No matter what happens, we can choose to look at it, as you're saying, this is happening for me, like to benefit me, to improve me, to teach me, to guide me, rather than this is happening to me. And it doesn't matter what it is. It could be getting on the ramp at the, it could be that, or it could be, I don't know, spilling a bottle of water on the ground, anything. It just, every little tiny moment of our lives, I think we have the opportunity to choose peace with that perspective.
Yeah, I used to, you said dropping the water. I can remember being in a hurry trying to get out the door, having a yogurt and dropping it, and it splattered everywhere. And I couldn't just leave it because I live in Arizona. It would be dried and caked on for 5 years if I did that. And I would yell out, I don't have time for this. And that was kind of my mantra. If anything happened, I don't have time for this. And I let that go several years ago. I no longer say that because when you're like, I don't have time for this, I think the universe serves you more if you don't have time for it. And
Right.
I'm super careful with those types of things and the outbursts. That outburst on the highway was more unusual than usual now, which we're always
Nice.
still a work in progress, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. We're gonna be human until we're not, you know.
We're going to be human until we're not. And I think that that's a mic drop comment. Well, Bubba, I'm sure that people who are watching would love to know how to connect with you. So tell us about what your book is called, where they can find it, and anything else you want to tell about what you're working on.
Yeah, so my book is called Becoming Ready to Die: The Fight for My Soul and How to Reclaim Yours. It is on Amazon. I will absolutely share links.
Okay.
My Instagram is Bubba Herrick Author. My LinkedIn, you can just look up my name, Bubba Herrick. My website is bubbaherrick.com. If you just look up my name, all this stuff will pop up on the internet.
Let's spell it for people who are watching or
Yeah,
listening.
Bubba Herrick, Bubba space Herrick.
Okay. Excellent. Well, Bubba, I feel like the luckiest person in the world to be able to have a
Oh my gosh.
conversation like this with you. I so enjoy you. You are a delight. Like every time I hear your name, I'm going to smile so big. And I really and truly hope that in the future our paths cross and we get a chance to meet in person. But Bubba, I want to thank you for what you are doing, for your vulnerability, for your candor and your honesty in these conversations. And thank you for what you are doing to help wake up the collective. It is so needed right now.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you. And I wish you nothing but the best and success. And I can share that for those watching, if you're still watching, please subscribe to Laurie's channel. She's amazing. She does this way differently than most other podcasters I've been interviewed by, and I truly believe in her. So Laurie, thank you. Thank you so much. And I think we will cross paths, and we absolutely will.
Let's make that intention right now. We need like a pinky promise on it.
Let's co-create that together.
Let's co-create that. I love that. And of course, this show is absolutely nothing without all of you who tune in to watch, to listen, and to share these incredible experiences with somebody who needs it. And if you still have questions, you can join me for Wake Up Wednesday live, 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Do you believe that love never dies and you want to hear stories that prove it? Well, hit the subscribe button. You belong here.